Hello, everyone, and welcome to our MDI myth-busting series. Today's myth is next of kin aren't that hard to find. Presenting today is Charlotte Carter, Medicolegal Death Investigator 3 with the Department of Medical Examiners in Honolulu, Hawaii. Without further delay, I will hand things over to Charlotte.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's a little early for me here in Honolulu, but I really appreciate everybody being here. And this is a topic that's probably one of my favorite things and one of my favorite challenges as a death investigator. So again, thank you for being here, and I appreciate all your support. And feel free to drop questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to those afterwards. Thank you. So finding next of kin can be a real challenge. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the death investigator before I get into the specifics of next of kin. So really, as death investigators, we have three really big jobs. I mean, we do a million things, but our first job is to make sure that the decedent is identified. We have to know who we're dealing with and who is our deceased so that we can proceed with everything else. The second is information gathering, and I'll talk about that as well. And then our next of kin notification, and that's really going to be the meat and potatoes of this presentation. So again, if the decedent is unidentified, that's a whole different set of challenges. You can't really search for next of kin. You can't search for a lot of stuff that you have to do. But identification in general, depending on your jurisdiction, can be made by looking at their government ID, looking at the hospital identifications, family or friends that might be present. Fingerprints is a super easy and quick way to get identification done. And here in Hawaii, we are one of the states that takes fingerprints with our driver's license and our state ID. And I'm going to give you a little more info about our driver's licenses because we have some pretty cool stuff that helps us find next of kin on there. Of course, DNA, which is expensive and time consuming. We often make surgical hardware identifications. One case, we had one of the very small kind of pill-shaped pacemakers. We didn't know the decedent had it. On X-ray, it looks kind of like a bullet. So our doctor kind of had a moment, but we were able to pull that pacemaker out and make identification through the serial number. And then, of course, your standard body and dental X-rays. I'm sure there's other means out there, but that's a whole other talk. Information gathering, that is a lot of what we do. What information, and I'm going to apologize if I'm a little ME-centric, so I'm not trying to be insensitive to the folks that work in coroner's offices. This is just my experience as an ME office. But what does your department need to determine the cause and manner of death in addition to what is seen at autopsy? This is going to include your visit to the scene and your documentation and descriptions of what you're seeing while you're at the scene, what you're seeing on the decedent's body. Any witness accounts or interviews that you conduct is going to be really important. Gathering records, medical records, ambulance records, maybe even police reports, taking measurements, and, again, a million other things that we need to do. I work in an office where we have a lot of follow-up and our reports are not due the day of the death. So we do a lot of this follow-up for our physicians. Now on to the big show. So next of kin. So the first thing you have to make sure you know is in your jurisdiction, who is the legal next of kin? Most states have a very similar law to what Hawaii is, but the last thing on here I'm going to talk about is a little special to Hawaii. But there can be any legally designated person. So if you have a trust or a will or something that says, hey, this person's responsible for everything, regardless of a biological relationship, that person is going to be in charge and be responsible for things. In the absence of the above mentioned person, it would then be the spouse. If there is no spouse here in Hawaii, it's the adult children. We don't differentiate between the eldest or the majority. Each of the children has the equivalent rights. So it's kind of a first come, first serve unless there's a dispute. So if there's personal property and family can't agree, I want to come pick it up. No, I want to come pick it up. And they're just disagreeing. We make the majority agree. And that's, I think, the fairest thing we can do here. If you don't have adult children and you're unmarried, your parents, it goes on to siblings, grandparents, and aunts, uncles, cousins, kind of those more peripheral family members outside of there. And one of the interesting things about Hawaii is they do recognize what are called hanai relationships. And these are your aunties and uncles that may not be your legal or biological aunties or uncles. So it's a tradition here, and I think we all have those family members that may not be biological, but they're certainly part of our families. So they do recognize those relationships in the absence of any blood relative. The one thing we do not recognize here is common law marriage. So if you are in what you consider to be a common law marriage, that is not valid here in Hawaii. So this is just a family tree to kind of, let's think about this. If the me in there dies, who is my next of kin? Well, I'm actually married, so this isn't a great representation. But my spouse would be next of kin. But if the uncle dies, well, doesn't look like the uncle has any children. So if the grandparents are still alive on this model under the or above the uncle, you're going to have to go to those folks. And just remember to look at that family tree to kind of say, okay, how can I piece together these individuals and their life if I'm not totally sure who the legal next of kin is? So in an ideal world, finding next of kin should be easy. That's the whole point of this, right? This is the myth, is that, well, everybody has a relationship with their families and they're going to be well aware of the death sometimes before you get there. And that is the ideal situation. We want families to be aware of the death, and they're a great resource for us to obtain information about the decedent, but they're not always there. Living on a remote island, there's two things. One, news travels fast. So we call it the coconut wireless here. Within the state, even information travels incredibly quickly through just individuals, and they can contact our office as soon as they hear anything. The disadvantage of living on a remote island, well, we're in the middle of nowhere. We're 2,500 miles from the closest landmass. We have a lot of tourists. It is beautiful here. People come here to visit and go on vacation and get married and do all these things, but they don't tell us who their family are when they come to do those things. We have a very large unhoused population here in Hawaii. Some people move here thinking it's going to be paradise, and then they underestimate the cost of living and things like that, and end up in circumstances, or there's just mental health or any sort of substance abuse or any of those issues that can lead to somebody being unhoused. We have a very large population. You move to Hawaii, sometimes you're estranged. If you moved here in the 80s, well, telephone calls were really expensive. It wasn't easy to just move somewhere and keep in touch with your family. So a lot of times we just have estrangements within family members, so it's hard to find them. We also have a bunch of non-US citizens. That can be challenging just with language barriers, with locating families, with, does your office even let you call to a foreign country? We have certain phones that in our office, certain people cannot call to foreign countries, but our investigators can. So if we need to do that, we're able to. But I'll talk about the challenges and how we overcome that. We also have a very, very large military population. So that can be jurisdictionally a little confusing, because we actually have jurisdiction over the death, but they have they have protocols in place that we have to respect for notification of next of kin and things like that, and it can get complicated. I've had circumstances where we know who the family members are, but in the military paperwork, that's not who's listed as the next of kin. I had an individual who died by suicide. His ex-wife was listed in his military paperwork because it was a recent divorce, and his father was looking for him. And I had all the father's information, but I had to respect that military boundary. So they notified the ex-wife, who then notified the mother, and the father didn't find out for over 48 hours, even though he had reported his son missing and potentially suicidal. So I think in those instances, I may just kind of say, sorry, military folks, if somebody's calling me, I'm going to call them back. But in general, it's a very good relationship, a good working relationship, and we're able to work with them very easily. So I mentioned about our Hawaii state IDs and our driver's licenses. The coolest thing that I think of is this on the backside. So we have our state IDs, and if you look at the backside, it actually asks you to put any information about emergency contact. So in this example, it's a father. I've had police officers call and say, hey, we don't have any family. You guys need to come pick up for storage. And I'll say, did you find their ID? And they say, oh yeah, I have it in my hand. And I'll just tell them, flip it over, and we're able to get next of kin basically instantly. The other neat thing is on the driver's licenses, it does not have the emergency contact, but it does allow us to put if we have an advanced healthcare directive. So again, that would be a legally authorized person potentially for disposition. So if you know who their physician is, you can find the advance directive, and you've got your next of kin. So those are that's one of the coolest things I think about our ID and our driver's license system here in Hawaii. It really can work to our advantage to getting this accomplished. So when you don't know who your next of kin is, I think we probably all go through some of the same standard searches, and I'll highlight a couple different types of next of kin searches and cases that I had to go through in crazy things to find next of kin. But of course, the first thing you're going to do is ask who's present at the scene. Do you know this person? Who's their family? Do you know their sister's name? Whatever it is. Medical records also generally will include an emergency contact. So we have a special medical records request form that we send out to the hospitals and doctors. And one of our options, one of our checkboxes is simply send us their emergency contact. If that's all we need at the moment, making sure it's that individual, we just check that box, send it out to all the hospitals, and we can do that directly from our database. Simple Google online type searches, you can find individuals and they will pop up with phone numbers, with addresses, with relationship statuses. So that can be really easy and really quick. I'm going to highlight one in particular that everybody, I think, after this should go and check themselves on, but also property records. In Hawaii, and I think in most places, you can actually look up property owners by address. I had an instance where there was a homicide. The individual was, it took us about 3 weeks to positively identify them. They were somewhat decomposed and had been concealed within the residence. But the news media that day looked up the property and they put his name into the news the morning after the death. Fortunately, I had talked to the family before that happened. But it's pretty easy to find out who lives or who owns a particular property, at least here in Hawaii. There are some paid searches. Our police department uses Clear, and again, none of these are sponsored. We use LexisNexis or Accurate within our office. I'm not sure what others are out there. If you know of some, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A, because I think all of us want to have the best search options out there. And these may not be the totally most accurate things to find a current phone number or current address, but we can at least get a name, maybe a city, and whittle down to find that person. So again, the online searches, the first one up there is the one that I highly recommend everybody go to and put yourself in there, because the amount of information that is on the Family Tree Now website is insane. It includes all iterations of your name that have been in public records. It includes your address history going back many years. It includes all your phone history, all your phone numbers going back many years. All your associates. So I stupidly co-signed on a credit card for a friend when I was, silly in my 20s. He showed up on my search. There is a lot of information, and then it lists relatives. And while it doesn't actually list the relationship, as long as you find a relative, you're normally at a good start. And so these are just a couple others: True People Search, White Pages, anything you can find out there. Again, if you have others to share, please drop it in the chat. This is really a resource discussion for everybody. The other type of public record I use a lot is our court database. So pretty much in Hawaii, every item in the court system is put onto a website. We don't have public marriage records, but we do have public divorce records. And you can tell in here, there's child support guidelines. So we know that this individual has a child. Now, we also know they're at least divorced. Maybe they've remarried, maybe something else has changed. But if we can contact, it does actually give the names of all the parties involved. I just kind of de-identified this for the purpose of this talk. But you can get the name of the two parents of the married couple that's divorcing, and then you can talk to the former spouse, see if there's an adult child, or maybe they know the siblings or another relative of the deceased. If they were married, they probably know this information. A great resource, and I don't know, I just kind of like reading obituaries. It's nice to learn about people. It's nice to see kind of this tradition, but it is getting to be less and less that we see people actually post true obituaries with a photograph and their kind of life history and all their siblings. But they do list them with relatives, usually at least first-degree relatives, sometimes even second-degree relatives. Here in Hawaii, a basic obituary is still free in our newspaper. So we do have access, and all the obituaries are public. If you do not have a subscription to the newspaper, you can still search all of the obituaries going back in time. So that has been really, really helpful for us. And again, as long as you can find one family member, you can usually get to the legal next of kin. If you aren't able to reach any of those family members, I call the funeral home. They're usually pretty helpful. They're going to be a little discreet with information sharing, but I have had multiple funeral homes ask me, well, can you provide me with all the details? I will contact the family we have on file and we will tell them to call you. I think my favorite thing was when I called a tiny little town, there's one funeral director in that town, and I said, hey, I'm looking for so-and-so. I can't remember the relationship, their brother, sister, whoever has passed away here in Hawaii, and we're trying to find this family member. He's like, oh, that's my neighbor. I'll go talk to her right now. So he literally went, talked to the neighbor, brought her back to the funeral home, and was able to help and took care of all the services. So you can find these, especially in small towns, you can find these really neat relationships. And normally somebody knows somebody. If it's in a large town like Los Angeles, it might be a little harder. But that was a really fun way to find next of kin. Other things that we use, we have access, I should actually say we have access directly in our office to police reports, to some medical records for the major hospitals, and to ambulance reports. So EMS, HPD, and the hospitals. We have access to all of those records. And police reports. You can look in and see, has there ever been a domestic situation or something that was documented with other family members in their history. It's also great for investigative purposes to look for drug history or other things like that. But the police reports can give you a lot of information, and not just the one for the death, the ones from any time in that person's life. I mentioned earlier that we have a ton of non-US citizens, and whether they're residents here or they are visitors here, the consulates can be really, really helpful. So we have, again, within our database, we have the ability to just send a notification out to any of the consulates. We can email them a notification from our system. Hey, this individual is a citizen of your country. They've passed away here in Honolulu, and we are looking for their next of kin. And they take care of so many things. They're able to provide translation services if we need them. They will conduct our interviews. They will bring the family to our office so we can conduct an interview with them as the translator often. So they'll take care of funeral arrangements. They'll take care of all the things that the family needs. And they are an incredible resource for us. So if you do live in a population with a lot of visitors, I highly recommend keeping up your relationships with the consular representative. The VA, or the Veterans Administration, again, we have a lot of military population here. They are able, we even have an unclaimed veterans link. So we have a direct email to the unclaimed veterans. We can go ahead and shoot them an email from our system, and they normally will call us and say, oh, these are the people we have on file. We'll try and find them. And if not, they will actually handle the disposition for us, which is great. For our unhoused population, we have a ton of resources for the unhoused here. There's shelters, there are social workers, there's case managers, and there's a lot of different resources here because we have such a large unhoused population. When we call them, they've normally talked to these individuals, spent some time with them, been like, oh, by the way, I'm pretty sure they have a brother that lives in Maui, but I don't know the name, and they'll help us. They'll do a little research, and they may even go and talk to friends or associates of that person and then bring the information back to us. So they are definitely a really good resource for our office. Social workers from the hospital, employers, a lot of times employers ask for an emergency contact, and a lot of time lease agreements or rental agreements ask for an emergency contact. So don't forget to ask for those. We have a ton of rental properties, of course, here. And any of those rental agreements, we hope that they have that emergency contact listed. Media and social media, not always my favorite topic when it comes to reporting out the identifications or things like that. You definitely do not want a family to be notified because the media released a name. It does work quickly to get a message out if you need them, and that can be a positive. But again, we have the Coconut Wireless here. The media doesn't always understand that they may impede an investigation. They may not understand that the family hasn't been notified. So I try and be pretty upfront with them when that happens. So we're like, hey, we really don't want them to find out because of a newscast. A lot of times, and you'll see a slide at the very end, they'll post the license plate as somebody who's died in a car accident. If we haven't been able to find the family, they know that car and they're calling our office. That can create a really angry or tense family situation. And we're always prepared to apologize, explain the policies and procedures, and really the behavior of the media is out of our control, or the behavior of people who are posting onto social media. If you know somebody's passed away, you post your tributes online, and if the family hasn't been notified, they may see that. Facebook specifically has a way to link relatives. I'm not super on social media, but I do know there's relatives on Facebook. I don't believe Instagram. I'm not sure about TikTok or Snapchat because I'm in my 40s. And then Twitter or X is another resource. Again, I don't use Twitter or X, but I did once. I actually had a case where the decedent was a homeless individual here, an unhoused individual here, and he had a great little camp set up near the airport, just overlooking the beach. It was really, really peaceful. One of those kind of people you don't expect family to necessarily have a high interest in or a really emotional response to the death. But I found out his son was a basketball player in the Philippines, a professional basketball player. And I had no means, I had no way to contact him. There was no phone numbers, anything like that. So I found him on Twitter and I sent him a little tweet that was like, "Sir, I'm sorry to message you this way, but I need you to call my office about your dad." And literally within 20 minutes, he had called our office. I went on, deleted the tweet, and he was just really, really sweet. He was so thankful that we were able to tell him about his dad. He still has sent me emails over the years, every once in a while, pictures of the kids and updates. So that was a pretty special case for me to have somebody who cared so much about somebody that I might have not expected. And it was really neat to find him, I mean, through Twitter, the one tweet I've sent in my life. So I also want to tell you about a way that the media can help. We had an individual here. He was an unclaimed veteran as far as we were concerned. He had gone to the hospital. So his neighbors knew he had been in the hospital. And then he got hit by a car right after he was discharged, literally on the main street right outside of the hospital. He was involved in a pedestrian accident and he died. Nobody could find him. The Veterans Administration, his records had been purged or lost in a fire, and they could not find his records for his military service. So we had no information on next of kin. Everything we did was exhausted. And after a certain amount of time, things become public record. So even if we haven't found families, we do find a way to publicly disclose information. Once that had occurred, the media was like, "Hey, why don't we do this story?" And the story was about how he was a veteran, he was going to be unclaimed, and he deserved better. In essence, as a service member, he deserves to have a distinguished funeral, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They aired the story over Memorial Weekend, and that literally just added to the tear-jerk moments of it. And within 24 hours, his sister had called our office. I put a link to there, and they were able to do a really big, nice service for him. And that was pretty special to be part of, to have a positive interaction with the media that actually helped our office. So when you do have those, highlight your unclaimed, highlight your unidentifieds when you can, to try and get a little bit more information and identification and next of kin found. I'm going to tell you about a little rabbit hole I went down. So when I started about 10, almost 11 years ago, my supervisor at the time, one of my trainings was, "Hey, that investigator hasn't found next of kin. We're going to go ahead and have you help." So this was a woman who was found deceased at the airport. No identifying information other than her name and some plane tickets, her ID to be able to fly on planes. And she had a large suitcase literally filled with toiletries and nonsensical writings. She would just write notes to herself that didn't really make sense to anybody, I think, but her. And I honestly can't remember where my search started, probably with Accurant. I remember finding her ex-husband, but he was deceased. I found a bunch of nursing homes she'd lived at in Santa Barbara, California, and I called them. And eventually I got to finding her sister's name. This was pretty unique. The sister's name is Clyde. A boy named Sue, a girl named Clyde. I'm not going to judge, but it made this next of kin search actually a little easier. Ultimately, I found that Clyde had been a volunteer at a church. And I found that through a church newsletter. So I called the church. I was like, hey, this is what happened. I'm looking for Clyde. Can you help me? And they said, ooh, she doesn't live in Santa Barbara anymore. She lives in San Antonio. So I was able to contact the local police department, find an address for her, and send the police department out there to notify her. And the church helped with that. The church helped facilitate things. Turns out the woman actually had an adult son who had literally just turned 18. So Clyde was instrumental in helping him through this, just because, you know, with his mom's mental health, they were a little estranged, but he had to make all these decisions about what to do. But Clyde was great, and she was helpful in everything. So once you've found next of kin, I just want to straight up say in-person notifications are the industry standard. They are truly the best practice. But when you live on a remote island in the middle of nowhere, you don't have the resources always to do that. So for our office, our procedure is to call. If family is not present at the scene, we do not drive, even if they're on island. We call them. We don't even have the ability to fly to the next county to notify them. And in our jurisdiction, we are responsible. The police department will also not make notification for us. The biggest problem with that, I think, is that people feel like it might be a joke. And that's really hard to overcome. And every time I do that, I say, here's the website. You can look for the Honolulu Medical Examiner's office. My name is Charlotte. Call the number on that, ask for me, or you can talk to anybody and ask them which office this is. And I will go ahead and do that. If not, I will say, look, there was a car accident this morning. If you watch the news, this is the accident and the incident I'm telling you about that your loved one was involved in. So I try to just be patient and understanding. We did have one person who was really insistent his brother had not passed away, and it took him about 3 months of his brother not contacting him to believe that this is actually what happened. So we hear it all the time, but we try and just find ways to overcome that. And in my opinion, it never gets better. Telling somebody that their family member has died sucks. Let's be honest. But you do get better at doing it. I'm nervous, I'm anxious every single time I do it. I think my heart rate goes up for that more than anything else I do in my office. And if you're ever unable or unsure, contacting a local police department, ME, coroner's office in the jurisdiction where the family lives can be really helpful, and they can do those in-person notifications. Not all of them will do it, but if they can and they'll assist, great. We also do request assistance for identification. So we will send an officer or ME or coroner investigator the photograph of the decedent and the paperwork to sign saying, yes, this is my loved one. And we can get that done that way as well. We appreciate all those agencies over the years that have helped us. It really is a great resource. If you don't have a relationship with other agencies, it's a really nice thing to develop. So what do you do when you can't find family? Well, there's a bunch of ramifications of this. You know, your morgue space is going to be held up. The personal belongings, we actually don't release to the funeral home, which is kind of a bummer, but we hold the personal belongings. And if we don't find next of kin, we hold them for a minimum a year. Again, that's space. We're on an island, space is limited. The estate is unsettled, so there may be a car sitting somewhere. There may be a residential property that is going to go into default. So there can be a whole bunch of things that happen when you don't have a death certificate filed and the family doesn't close everything out. And then also prolonged grief or wondering or worrying for the family. If you've been estranged from your family member, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't care about them. And you may be wondering for your whole life where they might be. And what we can do to close those loops, I think, is really special. Even if it's not the resolution or the reunion that family was looking for, it does close the loop. And that is a really important part of what we do. So what do you do for your office? Well, number one, to get that morgue space taken care of, check with your county or state indigent programs. And so disposition can occur. Here in Honolulu, we used to bury until I believe somewhere around the mid 80s, late 80s, and now we do cremation. So the state pays for the cremation. We have 5 different funeral homes that assist us with that. And it works out pretty well. It takes a long time, but disposition occurs and the person's cremated, and we're able to make sure that they're at least physically taken care of. I would say if your agency does not use NamUs, This is our #1 resource. If you don't know about NamUs, look it up, namus.gov or government or gov. You're able to put in missing persons if you are just a layperson in the community and your loved one has gone missing. You can enter their information there. The police department can enter missing persons, but we can also, we're considered part of the law enforcement community within NamUs, we can enter unclaimed and unidentified individuals. NamUs has an entire staff of people who will try to make connections between the missing people registered and those individuals that are unclaimed or unidentified. But in addition to that, it's a public website. So you get these, citizen sleuths and armchair detectives that will be like, oh, I'm retired, I might as well help find people. I like genealogy searches. I'm going to go onto these other websites that maybe my office doesn't pay for. Ancestry.com or things like that, where you can track family trees, but we don't have the ability to do that in our office. And every once in a while, we'll get an email from an organization like this one, and this is Miracle Messages. They actually specifically target finding family members of the unhoused. They work with the communities and they work with family members that are looking for their loved ones that are unhoused. And this is also a lot of the population that if somebody is willingly missing, they won't actually take a missing persons report with the police department. If somebody's an adult that's of sound mind, they may not consider them missing if they're missing by choice. So we don't always get missing persons reports through the police department, but these folks do really, really help with that population. And they find next of kin for us, I would say once a month. So they've been really, really helpful. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is a NamUs case that I did very little, but it's probably one of my favorite things that I worked on. It's more about identification, but the advantage of what NamUs provided, I think, is the key to this for the next of kin. So in the late 60s, man came to Hawaii and was found shot, but died by suicide in his hotel room. ID was shredded. In the 60s, I don't think you needed an ID to do really anything. You could get on an airplane, you could buy a gun, you could do a lot of stuff without actually having your identification confirmed. They did find kind of like the laminated plastic materials in the bathroom trash can. So it looks like if he did have an identification, it may have been flushed. And he checked in as Ronald McDonald from St. Louis, Missouri, Main Street, St. Louis, Missouri. No other information was really known about the decedent. My old supervisor in 2010 put him into NamUs, and over the years, really nothing. But in 2019, I got a phone call, and this person was pretty insistent. She said, I'm pretty sure this is my brother. He disappeared from Arizona. There is a missing persons report from, the month he died here in Honolulu, literally days before the decedent was discovered. And they provided key information. This woman's brother, they hired a private investigator who tracked the fact that he purchased a gun in Arizona under an assumed name. So again, not his legal name and not R. McDonald. It was pretty unique. And the other thing she told me was he has a scar. So one of his fingers, because of course we're going to ask for identifying marks, if there's a tattoo, anything that we can make sure it's a closer match. She said, no, he just has one scar and it's on a fingertip. So she knew his fingertip had a scar. I contacted our homicide lieutenant. I explained the situation and we were both like, oh, this is, 50 years old. This is probably not going to happen, but sure. She found the report, and as I was reading it, 2 key factors. The prince had a scar and the same assumed name for purchase of the gun was there, because our police department did a great job. They contacted the manufacturer. They found out where the gun had been sold to, and they found out who it had been sold to from that gun shop. So it was the same name. So we were able to facilitate that. The decedent, of course, had been buried back in the day as an unidentified individual, but the family was able to see one of his photos from the investigation, confirm identification. They sent me photos back and forth, so it was kind of fun to be able to see him with his nieces and nephews and in life. And then later that year, this was luckily just before COVID hit, the family was able to come to Hawaii. We had had the Department of Health pull the records for where he'd been buried, and the family was able to place a marker. And I thought that was just really special for them to close that loop after 51 years. So that is one of the really amazing things, is even if NamUs, their staff doesn't connect the dots, there are people that go into here looking for their loved ones, and you're going to find them. And it's great. And that was, again, one of the most special things I've been able to be part of. That's really the end. I think I talked a little faster than in my practice runs, but my email's there. And this is that picture I was talking about, where everybody on the news media had published an image similar to this, where the driver's or the license plate of this vehicle was visible. So while I was on scene, his family already knew that that car had crashed and this was a fatal accident. That really bothers me when that's the way that family finds out. And I really think blurring a tiny bit for the dignity of the decedent and for their family to find out of the death in a more appropriate manner is the least that they can do. So I recommend working with your media, educating them on how and why we withhold information, and the importance and the sensitivity of what we do when it comes to notifying next of kin. So I so appreciate everybody for being here, and I think we are able to do the Q&A whenever you want to.
Yes, thank you so much, Charlotte, for a wonderful presentation. My name is Erica Christensen, so I'm going to be hosting our Q&A today. Thank you to all of our audience members who have already submitted questions. Continue to submit those using the Q&A pod as you have. But without further ado, the first kind of comment and question goes into the discussion of the recognition of common law marriage and kind of the variability of states. And the transient nature of Hawaii. So how do you kind of handle that if somebody's on vacation and they're from a state where common law marriage is recognized?
That is a great question. If you die here, the laws of here apply. So even though in your state you're a resident and you have a common law marriage, we actually can't recognize that here in our office. What usually happens with that is the legal next of kin defers everything and is able to authorize the common law spouse to handle everything, or they go home and have the funeral home there handle everything, where they legally can make all those arrangements. And then that funeral home contracts with the local funeral home to have everything taken care of. So even though we don't recognize it, there are pretty easy ways around it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That makes sense. And one of the comments was that Ohio recognizes laws before 92, 93, but after that, it's not recognized.
Interesting.
So I found
I didn't know that.
a little interesting to bet how
I think there's only
states are.
8 states only that do common law at this point. That's the last check I had.
Wonderful. The next question kind of goes into, do you have any guidelines or useful tips on how to use a basic Google search using the decedent's name to specifically locate family?
Oh, if their name's John Smith, I don't really recommend Google. I think I honestly, for us, if we know that they are not from here, I'll just Google and include the city or the state they might be from. Again, if they're from somewhere like Los Angeles, it gets a little more challenging. But if they're from a smaller region or a smaller state, it might be a little easier to search just with the city or with the state information. That family tree now is honestly the first thing I try. And if those of you haven't looked at it yet, go ahead and put yourself into there and check it out. You can opt out of that system, so I don't advocate that for everybody because I want to find next of kin. But that's honestly the first search I do. You can put the decedent in there and it hyperlinks to all their relatives. So that's the first one I use.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. And there was a lot of resources and websites in the chat. So thank you to everyone that's provided that and provided feedback. This kind of goes into a similar situation. If an outside agency requests assistance from your office, how can you assist them in finding or helping find next of kin?
Sure. So actually, this is one thing we did a lot with the Maui, with the Maui wildfires incident, was helping to find next of kin. But one of the biggest things is we can't go and tell them in person. So we'll do everything we can to find them at least the local phone number. And since notifications falls to our office, our police department also won't help. A lot of people also, when they Google Hawaii Medical Examiner, it comes to our office, but the neighbor islands have coroner systems that are actually run through the police department. So we have really unique circumstances here. So if they're not in our county, and some people don't understand, I mean, it's a small state. There's five counties technically, but 4 really big operational ones. If we can't find them, we'll at least do everything we can to find the phone number, find an address. And we also, I should have added, we do send letters to family members. We have a very nice letter that we can send out to families that says, I'm sorry, we've exhausted all resources to contact you in person. We found nothing else to help, and we can send those out. But if we can find an address or we can find a phone number for that agency, we certainly do. And I can do that, police records, ambulance records. I even have access to every death certificate in the state. So if they died off island, I can find out if they died in Maui or Kauai or the Big Island. And I can say, oh, you actually have to call the police department there. They will help.
Excellent. And a lot of what you mentioned is really this relationship building that occurs
yes.
within the medical, ME systems or coroner systems. Do you have recommendations for how to do that? Do you have any formal processes, or is it more kind of just organic through time?
All the above. One of the things we have, and unfortunately, I think COVID has really diminished this group, but we had a statewide forensic science working group. So people from the different crime labs, the different police departments, our office, the different pathologists from the other islands, we used to all meet quarterly. And it really helped to build those relationships and understand the differences between our operations and also the similarities and what resources are available. One of the things during COVID that was great is my office was part of the emergency management response, of course, but we were on the calls every single day. There was a statewide call where we had the governor's office, we had Maui County, Hawaii, we had all the counties represented, and we were able to say, hey, we have a refrigerated trailer. If you need to get it, it's on a truck. It can be put onto a boat and it can be there in a few days. We fortunately never had to do any of that. But a little bit of is even, how do you get the unclaimed people cremated? Some of the hospitals didn't know that resource. Sending them the information for next of kin. So that is the number one thing, is if you have these professional working groups, that's a great way to build those relationships. If not, just reach out to them. We reach out to hospice agencies. We do educational seminars with the hospitals, hospice, nursing homes, things like that, just to make them understand what we do, why we do it. And, especially hospice agencies, even if they don't want you to call family, can you at least ask them who their family is? Because that's really helpful. And if hospice, it's a terminal diagnosis, but the hospice folks don't always obtain information or have them make funeral arrangements. So that does fall on us then to find next of kin. So I'd say professional organizations, national conferences. I love the AAFS meetings. I do a ton of networking there. I try and find different investigators to talk to. So if I have to call them, I'm like, hey, we met at AAFS last year, and now I need to find next of kin. What can you do to help? And what can I do to help you in Hawaii if you ever have that problem? So, yep.
Wonderful. I think that's so true, about this, network and relationship building field, especially in these, large scale situations like the pandemic or the fires or, these types of situations that impact multi-counties or, states oftentimes. So thank you for providing all of that. One follow-up to that is, if you had to pick one paid resource for finding next of kin, which one would you go with?
Well, honestly, we only use Accurate. That's the only paid resource we have in our office. So I don't know if that's the best. I can tell you right now, Family Tree Now is often more accurate than Accurate. So, if I can't find somebody in Accurate, Family Tree Now, or any of my other searches, I ask the police department to run Clear. That sometimes gives at least a better address history or a better kind of where they're from history. But I honestly can't say which one is the best paid search because I only have access to one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's the only one we've ever used in my office.
Excellent. So switch gear a little bit. Can you speak a little bit to, do you handle notifications on homicide cases any differently than, the other types of cases you handle? Unfortunately
not. We still call. And that is, I think, disappointing. It's disappointing for us, I think, probably also for the families. One of the things we do differently, especially for any newsworthy case, homicide, car accident, drowning, we just had a double drowning the other day. We make sure family is aware of media release before we do it. If cause and manner have been determined and have not been made public, we make sure family knows it before we do it, before we release it out publicly. We have a departmental public information officer, but we don't get on camera. We're kind of fortunate. We hide in the background, and we have our mayor's office here release all the press releases from our office for us. And there are sometimes rare incidents where we just had a homicide where we actually don't have next of kin, and her name's been released because there's been an arrest. And I just try and work with the police department. Any tips you're getting, advocate for her to help us find her family. So on homicides, unfortunately, finding them and notifying them isn't really any different, but the media release, we do certainly handle different for major events.
That makes sense. And, especially like, as you said, it does have implications beyond, just the next of kin and regarding the case and the investigative process. So.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't want the cause and manner to be out, but you do want the family to have an understanding, because when they get that death certificate, they're going to know. So we want to make sure that they are prepared. But if for some reason investigatively that information is being held really closely, we tell family, hey, this is what it's going to say. We are not releasing it to the media until there's a grand jury hearing or whatever happens.
Excellent. And I think that, like you said, that transparency and that communication and having those relationships in place kind of help in those situations as you move forward.
We have a great relationship with our homicide lieutenant. She does the press releases on the homicides, and she will always ask us, do you want me to hold the name? Do you want me to hold this? Have we talked to family? And that relationship over the years has really blossomed to be where they get it and they respect that notification is our job, and they get to tell us when to hold the cause and manner, but we get to tell them when to hold the identification.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you for that. This next question goes into, it asks, how long do you search for next of kin before moving to your cremation process? With cultural differences or the transient nature of the Hawaii population.
That's a really good question. And the best I can say is it kind of varies per case and what you find. If accurate is negative, family tree is negative, consulate's negative, whatever the situation is everything is negative, that's going to come up and be a reason that we file for the indigent cremation very, very soon. For the homicide example I gave you, we put her into NamUs like 3 days after, because we knew that it was going to be public record with the court proceedings. So we put her into NamUs right away. And we haven't filed for the cremation yet because we're really hoping that the news stories will bring a family member forward. Anyway, I won't talk about that case anymore, but we have a lot of play in there also, because it takes a long time for them to actually conduct the cremations. It takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months for the state to process the paperwork, assign the crematory to pick up. So once we file, if we find family in that time, we can always cancel that request. So we do it as soon as possible. We have about 150 spaces in our morgue, and so we want to make sure that we're respectful of our space and able to handle things as quickly as possible.
Right, understand. And as you mentioned, space is, it's a big factor across the country regarding how much extra space an office really has to continue to conduct their day-to-day work as well. So it's definitely as you said, a balance of the case specifics.
Very much so.
Excellent. So this question is from an international audience member. So they ask, does the identification of the body of a European national under a fictitious name, so include the extraction of a medical file? And is this more important in the procedure, particularly from the United States?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but if somebody comes to the US, if it's legally, they have fingerprints on file. So what we would do is send those fingerprints to the FBI or to Homeland Security, and we would have them identified. If for some reason the identification that comes back in those records does not match what we were told or what we thought was this person's name, we can request the full file from the FBI, whether it's civilian or criminal. And so we can get the name history and the alias history. If it's somebody here locally, if they have an arrest record, we can also look up all of their aliases. So I hope that answered the question, because I didn't totally understand it, but we work with the other agencies that would have facilitated that person coming to the US. And if they came here illegally and there's really no record, sometimes we just can't. But we are able to get medical records. I have gotten them internationally, as long as we have the correct identifiers, the name, the date of birth, and things like that. So we have received records from international agencies without issue.
Excellent. And you had mentioned too, the importance of having that relationship with the consulates.
Yes.
Would that be kind of an opportunity to reach out to them to look for more specifics?
Definitely. If we have a foreign national, we know their country of origin, we're able to contact that. I would say I'm German, I'm dual citizenship, so I'm not dogging on Germany in specific, but Germany will not help us find next of kin unless it's a criminal act. So the German consulate here, I know him. He's like, sorry, unless it's criminal, that's a privacy violation in the German to do their searches for something that's not a criminal activity. So that can be a little difficult, but speaking a little German, I can normally find people and I can notify them myself if I need to.
Excellent. And you had mentioned a little bit about like social media, how to use it, the minimum times you have used it. I guess, do you have any other recommendations? I know myself, I usually look for holidays,
Yeah.
times when people are spending time with families. But do you have any other recommendations?
Yeah. Actually, holidays, I'm going to say when you're at the scene, look for cards. If it's around the holidays, who is sending them a Christmas card or a Hanukkah card or a birthday card or Mother's Day card? If it's something like that, I just snap a photo of the envelope. And if it's unopened, I will, or if it's opened, I will read it and see if they're like, oh, hey, Auntie, like, we miss you, whatever it is. I have a name, I have an address, and I can go from there. But on social media, I would say really our office uses Facebook the most. And that's because it actually says, like, this is my cousin and this is my brother. And sometimes people are, I don't know, I'm not going to judge, but people put their phone numbers and are like, hey, cousin, give me a call sometime. And they'll put their phone numbers like attached to a photo. So you can look at their photos and look at the comments or look at the replies to different posts, because sometimes you'll find information that's like, oh, we miss you, nephew, things like that. And you'll be able to get a little bit further. You can also send messages to people. It's not super successful, but I always am like, oh, let's friend this person and then send them a message, because that actually will then go into their file. They'll be like, why is this person friending me? And then they'll end up getting the message in their messages as opposed to like the Facebook spam folder. So that's kind of the biggest thing we do. Instagram kind of does the same thing, but if it's not public, then you of course have a little more challenges.
It is becoming more common for offices to have a social media account.
Yes.
I guess, do you recommend reaching out from that branded account, or do you find more success reaching out from a personal message?
I'm not inclined to reach out from a personal standpoint, just because I don't want to have families like personal relationships in that way. But yeah, we have like not an official check mark Facebook page, so maybe obtaining that would probably be a good idea for our office. But because we don't really try and be present out there, we really simply use it to facilitate finding next of kin. So sending those messages, friending people. If we do have a press release, we might link to it in our Facebook page, but we really aren't like other city departments. Like our emergency managers are out there on social media all the time posting stuff. And we just kind of sit in the corners and are like, hi, are you family? And that's all we do.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you. Well, we have one more question as we kind of wrap up. So if there's any last minute ones, go ahead and drop them in the chat. But they specifically asked, are there any state laws in Hawaii that give a definition to what constitutes unclaimed status to the decedents? And they also provide sometimes here in Pennsylvania, as the only law about unclaimed was written in the 1890s, and it's very vague. Wondering if Hawaii has a similar problem.
Not really, to be honest. Our indigent program is actually robust enough to where if a family member, if we know who they are and they say, I can't afford to cremate, they can sign a form and we'll send for cremation. So it's pretty generous. It's pretty liberal. Hawaii is a really, really blue state. We have healthcare funded by the state. If you don't have healthcare beyond whatever federal requirements there are local abilities for that. So our Department of Health and Human Services has resources for funeral services for anyone. If a family member wants to apply for a reimbursement because they had to borrow money from a bunch of other people, they can actually get some portion of the funds reimbursed through the same indigent program that we would use. They just don't want to be considered unclaimed. The other thing is, even though somebody is unclaimed, families can still claim the ashes. The funeral homes will still give the ashes to the family, and if none are found, the state allows them to scatter or inter after 6 months.
So I wonder, there's, variability in offices, regarding
Absolutely.
the reclamation of those,
Yes.
cremated remains, especially as, in times of financial crisis. So.
Yeah, I'll add one thing for those common law situations, because the ashes might not be released to that person if they end up as an indigent cremation service here. That common law person also can't get copies of the death certificate by our laws. It's really hard here to get any sort of vital record when you can't prove your relationship. Thank you to the birther movement of, Obama's birth certificate. If I wanted to if my dad died here, if my uncle died here, I'd have to produce my birth certificate that shows my dad's name and my dad's birth certificate that shows that they have a relationship. That's how strict they are about getting a death certificate here. So you have to prove the relationship, and in a common law, there's almost no way you'd be able to get that in Hawaii.
Interesting. And that's very interesting, especially with the inclusion of, that information on your IDs, that kind of shows the power of having some of those legal documents in place, in certain situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So we do have one last question. They are asking a little bit more about the continuing education credit for ABMDI. I will mention it aloud just because I'm sure there are some questions. It will be calculated for the amount of time you've spent in the full webinar. So thank you for sticking around for the Q&A portion. You will get a certificate at the closeout of the webinar through the learning portal. And then you can email that certificate through ABMDI, and there's more instructions through our website. But if you have more questions, feel free to email the FTCOE as well with that.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, and thank you again for your wonderful presentation. To our audience members, thank you so much for all of our questions. As she said, her email is on the screen now, and feel free to reach out with anything more. Charlotte, do you have anything you'd like to close out with?
No, feel free to contact me. This was really fun. I'm really enjoying being not only a participant, but all the webinars that I've seen through this program. I think it's really good. So thanks for having me and inviting me to speak.
Excellent. Thank you. We hope you all have a wonderful week.
Yes. Have a nice day, everybody. Aloha.
As you depart, we kindly ask that you take a minute or two to complete our post-event questionnaire. The link will be pasted in the chat and also appear as you exit the Zoom room. Your feedback helps us improve our outreach efforts and continue to provide the best experience possible. Thank you again for attending, and we hope everyone has a great day.